President Trump has just spoken with Russian President Putin, and some details come directly from the president. He has just put out on his Truth Social, and so it's everywhere now, that they discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, and the dollar. He also revealed the two agreed to visit each other's countries. He said, "I had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I just read what he said they talked about. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people, as we likewise lost so many. We each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed," so this is Trump posting about his recent call just moments ago with Putin. He said, "But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We also have agreed to our respective terms, starting negotiations immediately. And we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now." So this is playing out contemporaneously as we're here live on Outnumbered. "I have asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of CIA John Radcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly about will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would have not happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost," President Trump writes. "I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man that I personally greeted last night at the White House. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon." The President of the United States. Charles.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Hands-on, getting things done. It's hard to put it into words. You know, I actually was getting goosebumps as you read that because of what we've already seen. You know, just in the last few weeks, what we've already seen, including getting Mark Fogel home. And it just makes you feel pretty confident that this conflict will be resolved much sooner than anyone had anticipated. And to President Trump's point, it did not start under his watch and probably would not have started on his watch.
You know, it is a promise that we now know on July 13th, the conversations that he was having with Mark Fogel's now 95-year-old mother.
Yeah.
And he promised her he would bring Mark Fogel home. And he talks about promises made, promises kept, and we think, okay, campaign, that has to do with all of America. But it can be personal, too. You've been there with a front row seat when it gets personal, Kaylee.
Yes, and that was a very personal story he shared, and it was very interesting and fascinating to hear. And I think, look, reading that tweet, that Truth Social, as you did, I was just thinking back about foreign policy over the last decade and a half. And you think about President Obama, and you think about Putin and his invasion of Crimea that happened. And, you know, Obama responded with minor sanctions. Then Trump comes in, and it's stability for 4 years. There's no Russia annexing X, Y, or Z. And then you bring in Biden, and then you get a war in Ukraine. And then Trump, here we are, just over 3 weeks' time. Mark Fogel's released. Then there's this conversation, and you're talking about winding down the war in Ukraine. If President Trump, and look, there's a lot of ifs. We don't know what will happen. If he manages to wind down the war in Ukraine, get a status quo in the Middle East where Iran is on its heels, where you get a Saudi peace deal, this is legacy-defining presidential moves on the foreign policy stage that would put you in the realm of Ronald Reagan. Again, a lot to be played out. We're only 3 weeks in, but these are very encouraging signs 3 weeks in.
You know, I know it's a big moment, and on this couch, Kaylee and Emily and I will all talk about our faith. And I think at this time, our enemies don't like this. And if you were ever going to pray for a president and the United States of America, now would be a really good time to pray for our protection as a nation and for his. You talk about the speed at which he's moving. Our enemies are leaning all the way in now.
10 hostages released in 3 weeks. And to Mark Vogel's point, when he was released, he thanked the entire diplomatic corps and so many pairs of hands that each played a part under what he called the President of the United States as his hero's direction. To your point, the action, the speed of which that Americans have seen results, that families have seen results, like Mark's family. There he is right there. I mean, they have been waiting for this, and they received a phone call by the State Department during Biden's administration, letting them know that their beloved son and brother was not part of the hostage release that involved Brittany Griner earlier. And that was a horrible phone call for them to receive. Here we have, again, in that post, too, I note, number one, that President Trump referenced that negotiations will be led by the director of the CIA, by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, NSA Michael Waltz, Ambassador Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. So he says they will manage the negotiations. This is a delegation under his execution, which I think also is a hallmark of this presidency. We talked about he surrounded himself with people who have the same vision and will be in lockstep with putting America's priorities first. And the visit between the two presidents, as promised in this tweet or in this message, I think will be quite phenomenal.
Yeah, that's really important, too. Look, just real quickly, on that day, July 13th, last summer, when he had the conversation with Mark Vogel's mom, now 95, I promised to bring your son home. Just 2 or 3 hours within that whole realm was the first assassination attempt.
Yes.
A presidential candidate who'd been shot in Pennsylvania, Butler, Pennsylvania. He never lost track of that promise he made to her.
No, it actually solidified his resolve. In the 4 years, the gap in between his presidencies. And that's what's so unprecedented about this, because normally a two-term president, by their second term, they're absolutely exhausted under the weight of the responsibility of the job. You know, we've never seen in our lifetime someone who has 4 years to really consider what they would do, with the energy of getting back into the White House. But what actually makes me, I'm not surprised by this based on what he's done. What makes me really sad is that Joe Biden could have picked up the phone. Joe Biden could have had this conversation. Joe Biden could have preserved hundreds, thousands of lives. I mean, if this is what it takes, I would like to think so. If it's as simple as a conversation, the $100 billion we sent to Ukraine, how many hundreds of thousands of people dead?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I guess I just asked, could the man who managed to call people garbage on the right side of the aisle in the latter days, who hurt the presidential candidate for sure on the Democratic side, could that man have led to this much? Could he have accomplished it?
Well, now we get to look forward. We don't even have to look back.
We don't have to look back.